Today, we are going to be looking at how to properly implement a color pipeline flow between your VFX work and your color grading work. So, let's go. Basically, here is just a small example showing you how all of this knowledge that we are going to be learning comes into play. So, for example, I have my footage here and it comes in a really flat format, but here basically it just comes like this. It comes like this from my camera, but then I'm pushing that to linear. And from this linear image, I can add the smoke, I can add the water explosion, some glow on top of it. I can work with the exposure the same as I would work with a camera. So here -8 because it's coming really, really hot from the software. And on top is just the final adjustments, like bringing back the image the way it would come from my camera, which is like this. And then I have a limbing LUT also that I always use on all my footage. And then I just add on top and it looks just the way that it would if I just exported this video or took the video straight from my camera, added the LUT, everything will look the same, but now we have the two smokes on top. Here's also another video that I did using this technique. So basically I did all the color grading after, and before what I did was to add all of these effects on top. So basically this ghost effect and these effects on the back of the footage, all this, and then now this is the Blender 3D that I also exported. I adjusted the colors on After Effects and yeah, did some displacement, and then after that I did all the color on the DaVinci Resolve. So quite easy also. So let's just first go to the tablet and let's just take a look at the overall idea that we need to understand to put all of this into practice. The way our camera is capturing, the footage in the dynamic range is being stored in a curve that looks kind of like this, So when it comes to the highlights, we save it a little bit, and in the darks we have less information in this area here because our camera is better at handling highlights. But when we look at an image in our computer, and the way the real world works, let's put it that way, it's like a linear type of curve. So let's say this is our regular EXR type of file that we have on Embergen, we have on Blender, and whatever. So basically, one of the benefits of working in this type of color is that first everything is kind of like physically based, meaning that if we push the exposure here by 1 + 1, it's kind of like the same as pushing the exposure by 1 in our camera. So everything becomes a bit more intuitive, and you also have more dynamic range to work with. So basically what we are doing now in this process is a way of bringing our camera that has this information like this, and we are making it to behave like this in a linear fashion. And on top of that, when we export, we can export back to this type of behavior here. So we work, so here's basically how it comes from our camera. Here it's how we are working on the software, the compositing software. And this is how we are going to export our footage back to our camera curve. Meaning that when we push to the color grading, we can just use the same LUTs that we have for our camera, work the same way that we are used to work in DaVinci, bringing directly from our camera. So all the VFX, everything that is related to our footage that we added on the VFX now can be pushed to the color grading step like it just came out of your camera, making our life really, really easy. Just to understand then what the software that I'm going to show you basically does is that it's going to understand how your camera behaves. And this, if your camera has a known type of gamma and color science. So for example, here is a V-Log in the Panasonic. So the only thing that I need to provide the software is how my camera handles black, because not all Panasonic cameras handles black in the same way. And also the ISO that you're using will handle black in a different way. So that's why we are basically just giving these photos with the black frames. But if you don't know your color, then you can just take a bunch of different pictures with them different exposures So bumping up probably your aperture. Then the software will also try to understand what is your color science behind it. And on top of that, you also send your black images, and then you will transform your image from this curve to a linear curve, meaning that you can work with EXR like it also came from the same software. Let's say it came from Embergen on Blender. So that's basically the gist out of it. So just for you to remember, when you are working with EXR, we are going to receive the image in a linear format. So on Blender, for example, you go to the color management and you choose the Panasonic S1 that you created or any other type of format that you created. The EXR is not going to take that into account. So your EXR is going to be linear, so that color management will not be present there. And also when you export as linear in other softwares like Embergen, you're also going to get a linear type of color management. Let's put it that way so it's easier for us to understand. And then our camera, of course, it comes with the settings of our camera, how our camera handles this information. But by using the software and also implementing this OCIO color management in our pipeline, we are basically going to transform from our camera to linear workflow. So let's go to the computer. So let's start by looking at this tool, the ETF image tools, where we're going to be using LUT Maker. This was created via the Ian Subert Patreon. So yeah, it's well worth it. So if you do have the money, just go there, sign up and be part of it. But basically what we are going to be doing here, he uses this for Blender, but we are going to use this for everything. We're going to open the LUT Maker. I already had one open, but basically here you saw, remember in the drawing, my drawing with the curve was like this. Basically, this is the curve that is compensating that curve, and then it's going to straighten that up. So for example, here I'm using my Panasonic S1. So we already know that the color science is this Vlog. So I'm just going to add the dark images. If I didn't have my color science here, I'll have to add the bracketed exposures also. But for the sake of this video, let's just use the dark image. So here I'm going to be add. Come to my documents. I already saved here the landscape S1. So I took a bunch of photos, just changing a bit the exposure, but yeah, so the software can understand how the dark is handled. And then I click to normalize also, so we can actually see the curve, and then it's going to be too linear. And then I'm going to click estimate, and then here it is, it's estimated. Let's just give it a zoom here so we can see the curve. It doesn't matter that much, but here it is. It's just estimating the blacks. Okay, and that's basically it. So I'm going to click here and say export to linear, and I'm going to save that. I'm not going to resave it, but you see here that I saved a from linear and also to linear, and that is enough for us. Okay, so we now can leave this, and then we can come to the OCIO maker. Let's just choose Blender. That's fine. So we put here import transforms, and then we can push here chromatic gamut. Mine is the Panasonic V gamut. You can also just choose here. If you don't know, probably Rec 709 of sRGB should be enough. And then we are going to add here the transfer function to linear. So the one that I just saved. So come here. That's to linear. It's saved. It's right here. You created. And I'm going to call this one the OCO maker custom, let's say, for example. And then I'll just choose where I'm going to save this. Okay, so here, my OCIO settings, that's what is going to be saved, basically the same thing. And now I'll click export config. If you have more cameras and you're just putting a bunch of different LUTs here, just do it all of this here and just save this base config so you can reuse in the future. But that's basically the gist of it. After you click export, you have this my OCIO settings. So how do we do this configuration? We basically come here on system, and then we click here, system control panel, advanced system settings. Okay, we are here, and then we are going to click on environment variables. Okay, we're going to click new, and then we are going to name our variable. So OCIO, and the value is where this my OCIO settings config is. So you see here that I already have that, and it's this my OCIO settings /config.ocio. This is basically this one. So you just copy this and add this config OCIO. You click OK, OK, And that's basically it. Your OCIO now is accessible for both Blender and After Effects. We are going to be now taking a look at that, how you can actually use this and put everything into practice. All right, so now that we did all the configuration that is needed, let me just show you where you can find most of this stuff. So here on Blender is going to be automatically set for you, meaning that now whenever you open Blender again, if it was already open before, it's not going to work. So you need to just close and open again. There we go. Here we come at the color management, and we see that we have this Panasonic S1 ISO 640. So basically when I click like this and I export in PNG or any format that is not EXR linear, I will be rendering like I took this video with my camera itself, which is really cool. So I use that all the time to export my PNG. So basically when I'm exporting, you see here in the compositing, I export the EXR to this path, and I also export the composite in PNG. So the EXR I receive in a multi-layer float half, meaning that this file will be linear and this is all the passes that I need. But in the composite one, I don't need all these passes. I don't need it to be linear, and just push it to deliver the image as if it was taken from my camera. So you see here that it's PNG, the composite, while I'm using the EXR linear for the file output. So this is really good. It means that if you export and you don't want to deal with the linear workflow, you just push the PNG straight to your footage and they're going to glow quite well. And then you just need to change a bit the levels and do, the color matching. That we are not going to be looking at this at the video, but if you're interested, just comment below and we can create one. And that's basically it in terms of a Blender. So just take that into account. The image EXR is going to be linear like we saw. Here on After Effects is a bit different. So when I'm in color, I just come here on Color Engine. It's going to be probably on Adobe Color Manage. I just choose the OCIO Color Manage and I use the custom one. And then I use this one that I just created. So here's basically the same configuration that you added in the variable config that we did together. So we just add the same thing here, and then you have all of that inside After Effects. But I need to change here actually in the interpret footage, and I need to change the color here. So override media color space, because the color space that I want for this footage coming to After Effects is the linear color space. So I don't want it to come to my linear workflow and not be in the linear format. So basically here is the footage in linear format. This is basically how the display color space, meaning that my monitor is not able to show the accurate colors in the linear color space. So I need to also tell After Effects that my monitor is not made for seeing in linear space. So I want you to transform the linear space into, let's say, my camera. So put it back how it would came out of my camera, or even can be our sRGB Filmic, sRGB Standard. Those are the same as you have on Blender. Find it quite nice because I'm using those softwares interchangeable quite a lot. But here I usually just like to put this Panasonic GH5 ISO 400 because I'm going to export in this format because I want to use all my LUTs created for this camera. So basically I'm seeing here, I should see the image as I would see in any other software without using this color management pipeline, meaning that it is coming linear and my monitor is displaying like it's not linear. It's actually the same color as my camera. So that's basically it for the first part. So here is our footage. Then I've added just this smoke that I got from AmberGen. And this smoke you see here is this one, is EXR. So it's linear. I don't need to change that. Everything's fine. I don't need to come here and interpret footage. Well, for AmberGen I need because, it's a EXR sequence, so it doesn't know the actual frame rate where I exported that. So I just changed that. But in terms of the color management flow, I don't have to change anything. So I would come here with my extractor, of course, to see all my EXR layers that I have inside this multi-EXR file. And here is how it looks without the exposure adjustment that I have on top. So it's quite bright. It's coming from AmberGen, like really, really hot. So I actually need to tone down a little bit because we are working in this linear workflow. I just add here the exposure and it's going to basically behave like if I had a camera and I was changing the exposure in camera. So here I see it's quite white, I'll just push it down, 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 down. I want something a bit closer to the colors in my footage. So let's say -7, -8 is what I had before. So -7 should also work. Kind of looks okay. You can see that the color, it's not really matching that much at the moment. There's a lot of contrast here. There's no blur. Here's a lot of blur. But you know, we are not going to be looking at that in this specific video. But here it's basically done. So we have our footage linear, we have our smoke linear, and we are seeing, like if we're seeing from our camera, if we are looking at linear again, we come back here, we just cannot see anything. So yeah, that's it. Now let's put this explosion here. Basically the same thing, EXR file is just like everything is linear. And then I just added also here the same exposure. They all came from Emberjam, so I knew that I didn't change the light. Basically, I would just need to push the same exposure since I changed to -7. Let's just adapt everything here to -7 also, so it all makes sense. Okay, so just so we fully understand here, because sometimes it can be a bit difficult to understand. So our camera is bringing us the footage in the Panasonic Vlog color science. Let's call it that way. Emberjam and all the other 3D softwares are going to give us the footage in EXR linear if we choose this file, of course, but to not make it super complicated. Let's just assume that we always get in a linear format. So what we are doing is we are adapting the footage that is coming from our camera to be in the same linear format as the softwares that we are going to composite within our footage. Okay, or on top of our footage. That's basically what we are doing here. That's basically what we achieved here. Okay, now if we would export this, we will not be taking this into consideration. So we will not take this. This is just for the display. So the export would look something like this. So we need to deal with that. To deal with that, there are many different ways, but the way I like to do is just to add an adjustment layer. In this adjustment layer, we are basically transforming this linear footage. So we are receiving it linear. We have this linear ACES, but you know, we are not actually using the ACES profile, but you see that it makes a difference. But then when I apply my LUT on top, it looks just weird. It doesn't look like the way it actually looks in my camera. So just going to use the linear. This is how it looks in my camera when it comes from my camera straight out of the box. And then the output color space is the same one that we are also using for the display and the same one that we also use in our footage. So basically we are just bringing it back to the way my camera saw the scene, but now we are also transforming the linear EXR files from Emberjam to the same color space or something color. Then on top of that, just for the sake of you seeing why this is so beneficial, I'm applying a LUT made for my G85, the Liming LUT, that is going to basically just put the colors in the correct place. Let's explain it that way. And then everything matches the same way. Okay, so if I put more love here in the smoke and also in the fire, things would fit a bit better. I would have to add some blur, and I can also add all of that in the footage before I export, and everything will look great because we are making sure that our footages are communicating between each other and everything is in the same, let's say, room. They are all working together. So that's basically it. For example, here, I would not add the LUT here. I would just export like this, like it just came straight out of my camera, push to DaVinci Resolve and do the color grading that I'm used to do there. And that the same thing that I did for the other video that I showed you in the beginning. So in this video that I showed in the beginning is basically the same thing. I bring the EXR with these buildings, and of course I did the camera tracker and so on and so forth. And then I added all this building here on Blender, and then I pushed to After Effects linear. I made the footage linear also, then exported like my camera was seeing the scene, and then just added LUTs on top and all the DaVinci Resolve regular workflow that I use to finish this image, and that's what I got in the end. So that's basically it. If you got something out of this video and you enjoy and you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. If you have questions, something is still unclear, please just leave in the comments below. I try to make it as simple as possible, although this is quite a difficult topic to handle and to wrap your head around it, but I hope it makes sense to you. See you.